went down the wrong way.
When it was stuck in my throat, I didn't really know what to do.
I had noticed he had kind of had his hands by his throat for like international sign of choking, and just kind of without thought, I kind of just started performing what I knew as the Heimlich maneuver.
Bartender Joseph Reinhardt sprung into action and saved 20-year-old Ashton Hoffhein's life. So why is his heroism making him the target of criticism? Well, it turns out the way he used the Heimlich maneuver wasn't exactly the perfect technique. Look, his arms are around Ashton's chest, much higher than they're supposed to be. He's lifting him off the ground like a doll. Bad technique or not, it still worked. You can see a piece of chicken fly out. Watching in a complete panic in the restaurant in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, was Ashton's mom, who works at the restaurant with him. A coworker dialed 911.
Is he breathing or coughing at all?
I think we got it out.
Ashton slumped to the floor, overwhelmed, but alive.
This technique wasn't perfect, but it did contribute to saving his life.
Expert Shane Woodall showed us the perfect way of using the Heimlich.
I'm going to wrap my arms around the waist, find the navel or belly button, put my fist just above that, keeping my head to one side. I pull in and up, forceful abdominal thrust until the object comes out.
So, perfect technique or not, Ashton says he's grateful Joe was there to come to the rescue.
I'm glad that he had saved my life.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Tim Bagwell. I teach public administration at Lincoln Memorial University in Harrogate, Tennessee. And I'm here today with...
Sixth grader in Plano got a really big scare last month. He was choking on a piece of plastic, but his mom says a quick-thinking classmate may have saved his life. Andrea.
Out of here. I'm here today with my friend, a good friend, Peter Heimlich, and we're going to talk about the Heimlich maneuver and other aspects of healthcare communication. And I just wanted to introduce my friend now, Peter Heimlich. Peter, welcome to the class. Tell us about yourself and what you do.
Hey, Tim, glad to be here. Greetings to your students, anybody else that's watching. I hope you find this to be an interesting interaction. May I introduce myself a little?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm the son of the late Henry Heimlich, best known for his namesake anti-choking maneuver. My life and my wife's life took an unusual turn in about 20 years ago in 2002. Karen and I, that's my wife, Karen Schulman, started researching my dad's career. He was still alive at that point. He died in 2016. And to our astonishment, we ended up uncovering an unseen history of fraud throughout his entire 50-year career. It's likely he didn't even invent the Heimlich maneuver. My dad was we ended up exposing him as a remarkable and destructive charlatan. He caused a lot of harm, a lot of blood on his hands, associated with a string of crackpot medical claims that he circulated through the mass media because of his access to it, because of the Heimlich maneuver. And he was a celebrity doctor. And for 40 years, he circulated a bunch of dangerous, absurd, improbable medical claims that nevertheless got into wide circulation in some aspects. We didn't know how to, Karen and I have no background in medicine. I have a background in journalism. So we decided we would bring our research to reporters. So I started calling reporters. At first, I used my own name, and my dad was pretty well regarded at that point. He pretty much never had a glove laid on him in the media. And he was considered this brilliant medical genius and humanitarian. So I realized I decided I would start calling reporters and saying, I'm using a pseudonym because I don't want my name to color your understanding of the situation. And I said, I'll tell you my name later if you want to know it, which I did. Anyways, our work resulted in that kind of outreach to reporters, resulted in something like 200 plus mainstream media reports, kind of culminating with an ABC 2020 by Brian Ross in 2007. And I went on, just not patting myself on the back, but regarding the level of what we accomplished, which really happened improbably. We didn't go looking for this. It just found us and we stuck with it. Dr. Robert Barretts, who's a former professional of an organization called National Council Against Health Fraud, said, quote, "I've been investigating medical fraud and quackery for 25 years. Peter Heimlich and his wife, Karen, uncovered the biggest case I've ever seen." And as we'll get into later, that is what led me to become friends with Dr. Bagwell. If anyone's interested in learning more, a lot of this stuff is on my website, which is medfraud.info. That's MEDFRAUD.info. And my email's up there if anybody has any questions or has any thoughts or what you might want to communicate.
Peter, we just watched this video from Inside Edition from, I think it was October of last year. So it's still going on, being called the Heimlich maneuver. Can you tell us about the events surrounding that video and the fallout from it?
Well, you'll recall, everybody watching, that the reporter and the expert, who's he's a paramedic who has a training company where he trains people in CPR in New York City. I'm sure he has a good company, but he pretty much got it wrong. If you noticed, what caught my eye when I saw this is that the bartender was doing chest thrusts. And in fact, the reporter says he was doing chest thrusts, but she and the paramedic castigated him, saying he did an improper Heimlich maneuver. Well, what both of them got wrong is that he didn't perform the Heimlich maneuver. He performed chest thrusts. Why is that interesting? Because as it happens in the medical community, there's been a 40-year debate over whether chest thrusts are safer and more effective than abdominal thrusts. Your abdominal, just take your hand, make a fist, with one hand, grasp it with your other, put it down below your rib cage and above your belly button and squeeze a little bit. That's an abdominal thrust. That's the Heimlich maneuver. Now, I'll bring it up, put it on your chest. That's a chest thrust. Part of the reason for the debate is that the Heimlich maneuver was essentially introduced by my dad with no science to back it up. He just took it to the media, and with his skills at considerable media and marketing skills, that's why he was very good at working reporters, which he did for 40 years. And that's why you probably know my last name. As it happens, though, part of the dangers of putting an idea out there without proper testing, that is a medical idea to be applied in life or death emergencies, is that if it hasn't been properly vetted, it may have side effects and complications that have not been properly investigated. And as it happens, that's the case with the Heimlich maneuver. Many people may think it's a benign treatment. In fact, there are scores of journal articles which are compiled and put on my Scribed account. Dr. Bagwell can share the link to that if you want to see it, in which it describes physicians in case reports in medical journals describe a wide variety of injuries associated with its use, from minor, like a bruised rib, to life-threatening, like organ damage. And to give you an idea, hang on a second, I got to make my screen bigger. I don't know how to make my screen bigger or get back to my, hang on a second. I ran across this, I'm sorry, Tim, I can't,
Okay.
Here we go. Here we go. I came across this news article from, it's the Taunton Daily Gazette, which is in Taunton, Massachusetts. It's dated January 15th, 2019. And its headline is, "Quick Thinking Taunton Teen saves mom's life during choking incident. Now, there's a lot of choking rescue stories that turn up almost daily in the media. They're good stories, they're good news stories. They help teach people how to rescue choking victims and so forth. What caught my eye here was that it's a story about a teenage boy, 16, who helped resuscitate his mom who was choking. This is the part that caught my eye. He says, forgive me, I'm trying to find it. Oh, here we go. The mother's name is Holly. While Holly did sustain 4 fractured ribs and a swollen spleen as a result of the final attempt, she said that nurses at Morton Hospital told her that such injuries are common as a result of using the Heimlich maneuver. So that's the first time I ever heard that from hospital professionals. And I immediately started wondering, is this common? Are emergency rooms around the country and maybe elsewhere on the planet dealing with a lot of injuries as a result of well-meaning Samaritans performing the Heimlich maneuver? Part of my interest is continuing. I should say, I also started blogging, doing original reporting in 2010 on my blog, which is called The Sidebar. If you want to go there, it's the-sidebar.com. And I've been called an investigative blogger by a New Jersey newspaper. I do a lot of things well beyond Heimlich and choking related, but that's kind of my wheelhouse. So I do those kind of stories. I report about anything that captures my fancy. But interesting aspect of the situation is I've talked to a lot of reporters. I know a lot of reporters. I have been unable to find anyone who wants to report the story that I just described to you about how common are injuries associated with the Heimlich maneuver.
It wasn't just injuries. On that Inside Edition report that we just watched, there was, you ran across some problems with getting it clarified or even trying to get a correction made by Inside Edition?
Oh yeah, that was a whole little adventure. I do a lot of, I do journalism criticism type reporting as well. And I'm strictly a hobbyist to everyone out there. I don't do this for money. I'm retired. I'm a retired businessman. Like I said, I had a journalism background, and this is an interesting hobby that it's interesting to me anyway to pursue. And I've gotten my share of corrections requests, published corrections for factual errors and other errors over the years. After I saw this story in Inside Edition, where the story incorrectly reported that he had done an incorrect Heimlich maneuver, I wrote a letter to Inside Edition, and I tried to bring it to the reporter. I tried to bring it to the paramedic. Neither of them answered me. So I wrote to the, I think it was an assistant managing editor at Inside Edition, who agreed to consider my correction. And I sent her the information. I said, the reporter her story was incorrectly reported. That the bartender didn't do the Heimlich maneuver. He did a chest thrust, and a chest thrust is approved as a acceptable choking treatment by both the American Heart Association and American Red Cross. I showed them documentation that the treatment is recommended by both agencies and by other agencies. I also explained that in Australia and New Zealand, they don't teach the Heimlich maneuver. In fact, the first aid authorities there consider it to be experimental and potentially dangerous. In fact, what they do teach is, in its place, chest thrusts. Okay, so I thought, all right, that's a news opportunity. I wrote a very polite letter to the assistant managing editor in Inside Edition. I thought, oh, here's a good opportunity for them to, correct the error and maybe teach their audience that there's another means of responding to a choking emergency. That's a good public health story, might save lives. They simply refused. I was not surprised because Inside Edition has been called by the Pew. I don't remember the exact phrase, but the Pew Research journalism organization, I forget the name, called them, basically junk reporting. sensationalist type reporting. So they don't answer to any editorial standards based on my experience and from some other things. They also gave my dad a platform back when he was alive to circulate some of his craziest ideas, and they did it without any counter voices to correct the record. So I guess that's points to the dangers of media sensationalism when it comes to medical issues.
Yeah. Inside edition.
I'm just getting to it. So I contacted the local newspaper where the bartender worked, and they did a first-rate news story about it, and they confirmed that he did chest thrusts. They also courteously invited me to write a guest editorial, a guest column, which I did, and I called that Inside Edition as basically unethical reporting. It's on my website or somewhere if you want to read it.
Sort of long story short about that is that you were able at least to get the local media to address it since it was their story locally, but nationally, this misinformation is out there and hard to reel back in. And you've been trying to reel it back in for a number of years, as I understand, with the extensive how extensive this is and how the media machine of your father kept perpetuating it. Can you talk about some of the other things that he was involved in, and how the Heimlich maneuver sort of had, it may not have been the Heimlich maneuver if his early transgressions had been reported.
Can I just stop for a second, Tim? I can't find out how to get back to my the internet so I can read the things that I wanted to read.
Try an Alt Tab and see if a window comes up.
Alt Tab.
What is?
Alt Tab. Okay.
You should.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Let's see. Let me see if I can get to my. Okay, good. Yeah, hang on a second. Yeah. Why don't I describe how the Heimlich maneuver came to be the near universally known treatment, certainly in this country. In June 1974, my dad published an informal article in a medical journal. That is, it wasn't a formal study. It was written more like an op-ed. And it was in a journal called Emergency Medicine. It was called Pop Goes the Cafe Coronary. Cafe coronary was a slang applied to choking rescue because often choking victims were mistaken for heart attack victims. So he introduces this idea, which at the time he called subdiaphragmatic pressure, I think it was called. And he said that he tested it at the hospital where he worked, which was Jewish Hospital of Cincinnati. And he was a chief of surgery at the time. His background was in chest surgery, and he had no background in resuscitation science. So this is a guy with a surgery background coming into the first aid community, a community that he had no real connections to. And he'd done a very thin study using 4 beagle dogs in which they tied, as I recall, they tied some meat to the string or to a string and put it down the beagle's throat. I don't remember it off the top of my head. It was just 4 beagle dogs, and it was, like I said, it was a very thin study. But Dad, in his wisdom, if you want to call it that, he decided he was going to launch the thing through the media. And the Heimlich maneuver always has been more of a media creation than a science creation, if you will. He had a previous relationship with a medical columnist named Art Snyder, who worked at the now defunct Chicago Daily News. And Art Snyder had written about my dad before and about a surgical thing. And he puts out, Cincinnati doctor, surgeon Henry Heimlich introduces new choking rescue treatment. He'd like to hear from anyone who uses the treatment. And the column was syndicated, and a week later, an alleged choking rescue happened in Washington near Seattle. And There's some questions about the bona fides of that rescue, but I've never been able to get to the bottom of it. But that came back, that got published in a Seattle paper, and it came back to Art Snyder's paper, and the paper made the most of it. Art Snyder saves a life. And that just started snowballing. People have very special feelings for the Heimlich maneuver that they don't have about other medical treatments, like CPR, for example. CPR is used to treat a lot more people than the Heimlich maneuver is, but there's something about the Heimlich maneuver. I think that people like the name. It's funny. It's got kind of a sexy connotation. If you put your arms around somebody from behind, there's no shortage of jokes available that have been made and that will be made. And it's very intimate. And if you help save a person's life, that's a very intimate relationship. Or even if you've made the effort to save someone's life. I want to stress right now that I have no medical credentials and I have no specific opinions on what the better treatment is. I simply like to do research into medical experts, and I will parrot or report what they say, and I try to do it without prejudice. But also people think, because my wife and I have done a lot of research that led to serious criticism of my father, that we have some sort of disdain for the Heimlich maneuver. It couldn't be less true. The Heimlich maneuver is a terrific invention, but the 40-year-old debate is whether it is the safest and most effective treatment for choking. So it works, but is there a better way? And that's where the questions of using, say, there's 3 treatments, just to get this out of the way. There are 3 treatments that are considered widely effective by American first aid organizations. Back blows, that is a series of sharp blows between the shoulder blades, the abdominal thrust, AKA the Heimlich maneuver, and chest thrusts. And the American Red Cross recommends a combination of those. That is, if you come upon a choking victim, their chances of being effectively resuscitated are improved if you do a series of the treatments. For example, the Red Cross says what they call the 5 and 5. If I come upon Tim Bagwell choking, they say, hit him between the shoulder blades hard 5 times. If that doesn't remove the obstruction, proceed with the abdominal thrust, the Heimlich maneuver. Do that 5 times. Repeat if necessary. So you're improving, by combination treatments, you're improving a chance of a positive outcome.
Are we paused or?
That's all I have to say.
Oh, okay. Thank you. The one of the things I wanted to get across to the students is how when something gets a name, and to relate to social media, which we talk about a lot in communications and in healthcare communications, there's the thing called the meme that gets out there. And in a way, the Heimlich maneuver was an early form of the meme, at least in the media. I think meme actually goes back to ancient Greece or something, but it became sort of a meme because it appears in so many places. You see it strangely, I think, and mostly in comedy episodes, you'll see someone do the Heimlich maneuver. And I think the naming is, the having a name that you can hang a hat on is part of the reason for that. And like you said, the name has a funny connotation to it. But there's also been, I think I recall us talking about a procedure or a medical tool of some kind that was named after a doctor, and it turned out the doctor's origins were not. I think of it in terms of the tearing down of monuments, how having monuments to people who were not the best of people, and now removing them is a thing. But that this doctor that you've mentioned, I think, had a different sort of background.
He was a Nazi.
And there you go. I can't remember the name of it. Can you recall the?
Why don't I send you that and you can pass it on your student?
Share it.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, this
So,
applies to my father too. For example, he lived in Cincinnati, which is where he came out with the Heimlich maneuver. And like I said, he was a brilliant marketer. I mean, that's why everybody knows my last name. He was relentless. He had a lot of time on his hands because he was fired from his job as chief of surgery at a Jewish hospital in 1977 for, believe it or not, walking out on a patient in mid-surgery. Before that, he'd had a lot of problems. For example, a doctor from the time told me that he had fainted in mid-surgery. What had happened was Dad, and I got this from a court record from 1974, Dad got sued along with the Jewish hospital and a half a dozen surgeons because in a wrongful death liability case, Dad was operating on a patient. He nicked the carotid artery, blood started gushing everywhere, and Dad passed out and fell on the floor. And apparently there was more than one occasion when that happened. And the surgeon who was his colleague said he was known, doctors have a mordant sense of humor, and he said he was known as the surgeon who couldn't stand the sight of blood. So 3 years later, it comes to a head. The Heimlich maneuver was already taking off, and he was becoming a celebrity doctor. And he just walked out in mid-surgery on a patient. I don't think anything went wrong. He just disappeared and couldn't be found. And the hospital took the opportunity to fire him and took away his privileges and ended up paying out his contract. I talked to him at the time, and I got the feeling that he did it on purpose because his days as a surgeon were over. The same doctor I interviewed who told me the joke told me that he couldn't get malpractice insurance anymore because of the fainting episodes. So he very deftly transitioned to becoming a celebrity doctor, riding the Heimlich maneuver into media fame. Not fortune, by the way. He never made much money. My dad pretty much lived off my mother's inherited fortune. My mother, if you're old enough to remember the Catherine and Arthur Murray dance studio, the Arthur Murray dance studios, or the Arthur Murray dance party, which was a staple of 50s and 60s TV. Those were my mother's parents. And my mother inherited a bunch of money from them, even while they were still alive. And my father pretty much lived off that through most of his career.
wasn't that if the medical profession didn't come down on him very hard for those transgressions? And I think you mentioned one time if they had the Heimlich maneuver may have not gotten as popular if he had been discredited.
Yeah, I mean, the medical profession is pretty much a liability-driven profession. So when things go wrong, I mean, a lot of professions are like that. The institutions will cover them up to protect themselves. So the story about why my dad was fired was never reported. I think, as I recall, I have a newspaper clipping somewhere, Dr. Heimlich leaves Jewish hospital to form his nonprofit Heimlich Institute. Okay, so they sort of sugarcoated the whole thing. Who knows what would have happened if at the time the story had come out that he walked out on a patient. I mean, it would certainly damage his reputation and credibility, I would say. But that didn't happen. And if that had happened, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation, right? But,
right.
But going back to your point about the Heimlich maneuver becoming this embedded cultural thing, there's I sent you a journal article. There's a journal for everything, right? It's called the Journal of Medicine and Movies, and it's an entire article dedicated to compiling movies that use the Heimlich maneuver, Mrs. Doubtfire, and a bunch of others that I don't remember. But so Dad was basically gangbusters pushing the Heimlich maneuver, and he falsely claimed over the years that the medical community had not been receptive to the Heimlich maneuver, that they had blocked him. And he was trying to create this image that he was kind of the David going up with the Goliath monolithic medical establishment. couldn't have been less true. He introduced it in 1974. 2 years later, the American Heart Association and American Red Cross adopted it as a bona fide and acceptable treatment for choking. They simply said, before you do the Heimlich maneuver, do back blows. And my dad then went on this warpath in the media, which he campaigned called "Back blows are death blows." And he falsely claimed, that is, he had no evidence to back it up, that if you hit a choking victim on the back, you're in fact driving the object deeper into the airway. There was no evidence to support it. Like I said, he just made it up. Dad, part of his, I think he had an inchoate understanding of marketing. And as everybody knows, if you introduce a new product, Madison Avenue has taught us this. If you introduce a new soap product, laundry soap or something, you have to try compare it to brand X to say why it's better. So I've always thought of the Heimlich maneuver, that is back blows, and my dad's attacking back blows as brand X. Don't do that. You're doing the wrong thing. Do what I say. And you'll have you won't have ring around the collar, so to speak. So, he was very effective at doing this. And in fact, in 1982, a study was published that seemed to back up his claims that back blows were dangerous. Check this out. It was published in a journal called Pediatrics, and it was written by 3 Yale medical professionals, Yale School of Medical faculty, and they had done some sort of tests where it certainly appeared that there's, from their aerodynamic studies, that they deduced that in fact Dr. Heimlich was right, that if you hit a choking victim on the back, it will in fact drive the object deeper into the airways. And they used this study, my father and the lead author of that study, to present to a convention of the American Heart Association in 1985. They were both on this committee. And as a result of presenting that study in part, the American Heart Association removed back blows from the guidelines. And between 1985 and I think about 15 years ago, it was Heimlich maneuver and nothing else for choking rescue. Well, our research determined that my dad clandestinely funded the study. And so it was tainted. And neither my dad nor the lead author, the late Richard Day, disclosed to the Heart Association that Dad had funded the study. And in archives, I found a letter from my dad to Dr. Day, the Yale doctor, saying, "I'm glad you received the check. Don't worry, I don't need a receipt." And when I found that, I gave it to a reporter at the Yale, the New Haven Register, I think it was, a very good medical reporter. And he did a whole story about it. It was a very nice story in which he exposed the clandestine nature of the study. Anyways, nevertheless, the media is the media. And the media, as I said, almost every day, you'll see a choking rescue story, either about the Heimlich maneuver or anything else. Mother, like that story I read you from Taunton, son rescues mother, Boy Scout rescues grandmother, schoolmate rescues schoolmate. Like I say, they're fine stories, but they kind of tend to reinforce the name Heimlich maneuver, as well as kind of, I think maybe over time, they kind of cloud people's thinking about this medical treatment that has become this cultural icon. I found a terrific journal article from 1979 by the late Joseph Redding, and he was gone by the time we started our studies. But it's a fabulous erudite article, which I highly recommend. It's called "The Choking Controversy." It's published in Critical Care Medicine, 1979, October issue, and it's just very eloquent and very witty if you read between the lines. But I love this sentence. The Heimlich maneuver is so well fixed in the public mind as the only solution for foreign body airway obstruction, that's choking, that to correct the situation would be like trying to recover the contents of a feather pillow released from a church steeple. I wish I could write like that.
Yeah, really, me too. To cap things off, it's come to my as we're speaking here, it came to me that which you might be able to share, and you have to a certain extent, as sort of guidelines for my students as healthcare communicators and as recipients of healthcare information, the red flags that when you look for red flags, when you see a media report or a newspaper article, what the red flags are in terms of there's something going on here that's not quite right with regards to, say, the Heimlich maneuver, which can be applied elsewhere. I think just to get you started, make sure we're on the same page here. I'm thinking of media reports about celebrities credited with that. So could you talk about maybe some red flags that people should be aware of?
Well, I can only speak from my own, peculiar history with this, because as I said, I didn't go looking for this. And I just found the whole thing so fascinating in so many respects, and it continues to develop. I want to point out, as I've said to you, Tim, that I have no background in science, and I'm never even interested in science or medicine. I'm interested in fraud. And I think that maybe has helped me to see things that maybe medical professionals and serious researchers who are dealing in data, and they're seeing the world through evidence and data points, and has someone made their case or what have you. To me, I seem to have decent antenna for fraud, where I'll be reading something and I'll just say, wait a minute, so I got to fact check this. There's something that seems like it might smell a little bit, because if this happened, then shouldn't that happen? And it's just very elemental, very basic, and how if something feels funny to me. And I would encourage, especially in this climate of misinformation, vast misinformation we're dealing with, and intent to confuse the public for various reasons by powerful interests here and there, what have you, or corporate interests. I think if you feel a gut reaction, it's like walking down the street. If you're feeling nervous or something, something's you're feeling creepy for some reason, don't ignore it. Follow it and see if it leads you anywhere, which is kind of how Tim and I got to know each other. Should we go into the Save a Life Foundation?
I think we have time if we can make it as concise as possible.
Sure, because I think it's very, it was a very educational experience for me. My dad was pretty much radioactive, even though he had a famous name in the media. By the time Karen and I started researching his career, 2002, because of all his crackpot medical claims that he'd made. For example, he was pushing the Heimlich maneuver to be used on drowning victims. The resuscitation community was completely against that, spoke out loudly, certainly within the journals about that. Dad had no background in immunology. Perhaps his most notorious escapades was something called malariotherapy, where since 1982, he began claiming that he could cure a variety of diseases, including cancer, Lyme disease, and subsequently AIDS, by infecting patients with malaria. He conducted a string of notorious offshore experiments that resulted in 3 federal investigations and considerable criticism within the field, as well as media criticism. And by that time we got involved, he was pretty radioactive in the field of medicine, to be sure. But we found that he was affiliated as medical director or some title like that for a Chicago nonprofit called the Save a Life Foundation. The organization was part of Homeland Security. They were pulling in millions in both state and federal grants. They were politically connected entirely up and down the Illinois political food chain. They had powerful Washington connections, and my initial reaction to it was, if this is a legitimate organization, why would they be involved with a quack like Henry Heimlich? right? So I start fact checking, and they claimed that they had the organization was supposed to teach CPR and the Heimlich maneuver to school kids, and they were the darlings of Illinois media. They were the subject of, countless media reports about this selfless woman who was made it her mission after her daughter died and was supposedly left to bleed to death, that she wanted to save others from bleeding to death. She said she was a nurse. She said she was a registered nurse, and that she started this organization in the early 90s that was going to teach CPR to everyone. Well, they claim that they trained 2 million school kids in CPR in the Chicago public schools. I did a public records request to the schools. They didn't have a single training record, okay? So I brought the story to, she wasn't a nurse, a registered nurse. She'd only lived in 2 states. All I had to do was, it was easy. I just checked the websites of the registered nursing boards in Wisconsin and Illinois, which is the only place she lived. They had no record of her as an RN, so that was made up. And I found out that the story about her daughter being left to bleed to death was fabricated. The daughter did die in a serious, tragic drunken driving accident where she totaled her car because she was seriously drunk. And the whole story is tragic and goes in other ways. So the mother had taken her daughter's very tragic death, turned it upside down, and used it to rip off taxpayers for millions. So I gave it to Chuck Gowdy, who's an ABC reporter, terrific investigative reporter in Chicago. That ended up becoming a whole fascinating story that resulted in probably close to 75 or more media stories over the years.
I'll share this link with the students. I'll share this link that we're looking at with the students.
Yes, it's on my website. If you just go to my website, it's pretty easy to find the whole compilation of media reports. And that's how I got to meet Tim, because he was interested in tax waste and so forth. And we worked together to help move the story forward, and for which I'm exceedingly grateful. And I should point out, Tim, that I used a pseudonym when I first contacted you because I didn't want you to be
prejudiced by.
And I told you it was an obvious pseudonym. I don't know if it was John Jones or something like that. And I told you it was a pseudonym because I didn't want my real identity to cloud your perception of the Save a Life Foundation scam. And eventually, of course, I said, and you just said, "Oh, no, what did you say? I'll interview you."
Well, as I recall, you've been burned by so many reporters who just would not give you fair treatment with the story because you had the same name. You were trying to expose fraud. Yes, it's my dad, but regardless of that, it's fraud.
Right. When I told you my real name, what was I don't remember you even batting an eyelid.
No, I think, first of all, I think you were Joe from somewhere. I'm not sure if it was where you actually were from, or actually where you actually live. We won't share that. But you said you were Joe from somewhere. I'm like, okay. And you just presented information. You presented information that was valid, so that valid information doesn't matter what the name is. So it was interesting to find out. When I speak to friends and colleagues about Peter here, they're always excited. Oh, the son of the doctor, and I say, yeah, but it's not what you think.
Well, okay, this will interest your students too, I think, because especially if you're going into public relations or anything communications related, be careful what you name something. Like, for example, Dad was kind of an icon in Cincinnati until these stories started coming out, and he'd been lionized in the press there for decades as this great inventor and humanitarian. And then the facts start coming out in mostly non-Cincinnati, non-Ohio papers and media. And the way it kind of works, at least in Cincinnati media, based on my experience, is they'll just quietly shovel dirt under the rug and forget it ever happened, rather than saying, hey, let's reconsider and look at this. So, for example, in 1988, Dad was on the cover of the Cincinnati Bell phone book with about dozens of other Cincinnati luminaries. More recently, it came to my attention that my dad was born in Wilmington, Delaware, and a press release crosses my desk, and it said a solar farm in Delaware is being named after Henry Heimlich. And I went, wait a minute, because nothing in Cincinnati, after he got exposed as a con man, dangerous charlatan, nothing is named after him in Cincinnati, okay? There's not even a plaque at the bus station, all right? So I'm going like, did anybody in Delaware Google his name? Because don't take my word for it, students. Google him, go to his Wikipedia, and you'll see a bunch of this information is already there. So I did some quick research. I found out that they'd set up a corporation named the Heimlich Solar Project Incorporated, something along those lines, and they presented it to 2 building commission meetings, and apparently nobody bothered to or had seen any of them. Scores of media reports that, including 2020, that exposed the guy as a scammer. So I said, this is wild. This is nobody Googles, right? That's sort of my wife's joke. Nobody Googles. So I wrote a very polite email there were 3 companies involved, 2 electrical co-op companies in Delaware and a San Diego-based international conglomerate that develops alternative energy. And I wrote him a very polite note, and I basically just showed him about a dozen of these media reports, serious media reports about my father's very serious, dangerous transgressions that resulted in or associated with the significant loss of life. And usually bureaucracies they just don't do anything. They'll just wait until it gets bad, and then they'll have to take action or something. To my surprise and delight, the day after I sent the email, I got an email reply from the San Diego company saying, "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We're talking to our lawyers now and trying to pick a suitable replacement name." So
Times have changed, maybe.
What did you say?
Times have changed, maybe.
Times have changed. It's a slow crawl. That is, things can happen overnight, because we've seen that with celebrities, like a Bill Cosby or O.J. Simpson, right? Something drastic like that, where it can happen very quickly. But in this case, it's kind of compartmentalized too, if I may just say one thing. There's Henry Heimlich, which I'd kind of be surprised if the students are watching this even know his name. Maybe 1 or 2, I don't know. But then there's a Heimlich maneuver, this treatment thing, this cultural icon, which people have heard of. They may not know where it came from.
Right. Oh. Well, I want to thank you, Peter. This has, I think, been very illuminating for the students. And I think it's an important aspect of healthcare communications, that especially that people, when they have that feeling, what you talked about, their gut feeling, when they think there's something might be wrong, that they should follow that instinct and look and see what's going on, that there's probably something wrong there. It may not be, may not know what it is, but if you look into it, you may find that there's something wrong, and need to either not follow it or to not replicate it, but investigate and report and tell others that there's problems there.
Yeah, I would say if the single best piece of advice I can think of at the moment is one thing quacks all have in common. They're always, and this was one of my dad's slogans, simple solutions for complex problems. If you got a complex problem, chances are that a simple solution is not, others have looked at it and it's not a simple solution.